My name is Patrick Reynolds. I am the Director of Public Programs. I organize speakers and lectures and help build exhibits here. We have a new exhibit about Utica shoes. So, without further ado, you're not here to hear me. I'm going to turn it over to David Staley. Have you introduce yourself?
I can't.
And you're an archaeologist with the state of New York. I know that, but I don't know the rest of the details, so you can fill us in. But let's give him a hand.
Well, Pat is correct. I'm an archaeologist for the New York State Museum. And thank you for the invitation to speak today. My plan for the afternoon is to talk about two different historical archaeology subjects or themes. One being the engineering and construction of the Chenango Canal lock sluice, and the other is what can be learned about the 19th century life in Utica from several backyard privies. The data is derived from excavations undertaken by the New York State Museum prior to the reconstruction of the north-south arterial by the New York State DOT. Our excavations occurred almost a decade ago. The deeply buried canal structures were not anticipated prior to the last phase of work. One cross-current shared by both sets of the research presented today is the strong interplay between archaeological data and archival materials. Some of the archival materials used are housed right here at the History Center. I'll happily take questions after each portion of today's presentation. The Chenango Canal was built between 1833 and 1836, connecting Binghamton to Utica. A notable feat of engineering, this 97-mile-long canal included 1,015 feet of lift using 114 composite and 2 stone lift locks. In its time, the Chenango Canal was considered the best constructed in the New York State canal system. As a lateral to the Erie, the Chenango benefited adjacent communities carrying traffic and products, although the canal generated insufficient revenues and was largely subsidized by the Erie Canal. The transport of Pennsylvania coal to Utica's steam-powered industries prompted the resurgence of Utica as a manufacturing center in the last half of the 19th century. The canal was abandoned in 1878 due to railroad competition and overwhelming maintenance costs. There are many reasons that this canal and the rest of the canal system are remarkable. Today, I suggest that some lesser components, structures that are underrepresented in the written record, have the potential to reflect and illustrate a greater range of human ingenuity and creativity. Chief engineers' names are spread all over the historic record and in published histories. These lesser structures and their repairs may be the only record of junior engineers, foremen, carpenters, and laborers on the Chenango Canal. In 2013, Archaeological Excavations by the State Museum's Cultural Resource Survey Program relative to the North-South Arterial project in Utica, New York, revealed remnants of the Chenango Canal Prism. As marked by the red line, I guess you may or may not see it out there in this lighting. Lock number 3, in behind the arrow in the top right corner, and its associated sluice. Again, in red dashed lines, I hope you could see them from there. These features, as well as several wooden privy vaults, again, the smaller arrows, and early household drainage systems All of these were found buried beneath several meters of late 19th century fills. Much of the wooden infrastructure was well preserved due to having been submerged and waterlogged. The focus of this paper is the sluice. A sluice functions to route excess water around the lock, relieving upstream pressures, preventing any overbank flow and canal bank failures. CRSP efforts uncovered evidence regarding the original pit and ditch excavations, a timber framework, sheet piling, plank decking, and stone walls. These features represent both original construction and subsequent modification and repairs. Keep in mind that what remains has been influenced by material salvage during later repairs. More significantly, the state sold at auction all but the lower 6 feet of the canal structures in 1880. Most of the structures of the New York State Canal System are thoroughly documented by engineering plans, detailed specifications, and other contractual records, many held by the New York State Archives. Prior to construction, specifications and plans for lift locks, waste weirs, aqueducts, culverts, and bridges were printed for distribution and made available for review by prospective bidders. The Chenango Canal had its own set of printed specifications, and one could assume drawings. However, no printed specifications or drawings of Chenango sluices have ever been found. The archives hold a single contract relating to several sluices in the southern district of the Chenango. The handwritten contract specified materials, prices, and timing requirements, but did not specify what the structure should look like. Only the whole is to be constructed in such a manner as the chief engineer or his assistants in the employ of the canal commissioner shall from time to time direct. I left it open and flexible. For the Chenango, even though 86% of the locks had some form of sluice, it appears that sluices and sluice structures were an afterthought and generally were short-shrifted. One suggestion of this is observed in the canal lexicon. Compared to other canal structures, the terminology related to sluices are variable. The words sluice, sluiceway, side sluice, bypass flume, etc. may refer to the entire water-carrying structure, or it may refer only to a lesser subcomponent. That same subcomponent has additional names such as weir, discharge weir, or upper flume. Even the section paralleling the canal has been called a ditch, raceway, and a water trench. I will use sluice for the entire feature, flume, ditch, and outfall for the various subcomponents. Another reflection that sluices were an afterthought is found on the pre-printed forms used by canal superintendents of repair for their bi-monthly and annual reports. Despite being consistent and occasionally major costs, sluices were absent from the entire series of printings. Somehow, wheelbarrows and hand tools consistently made the forms, yet superintendents spent over 20 years writing sluices as a line item. One source of graphic information we do have regarding sluices are the Holmes-Hutchison maps. In pursuit of standardized records, the Canal Commission tasked Hutchison to generate maps for this and other New York State canals, such as the Erie, the Champlain, the Cayuga Seneca, and the Crooked Lake. The overall appearance of these maps are indeed very consistent and suggest the map makers in Hutchison's employ followed prescribed templates. Strikingly, sluice structures are exclusively depicted on the Chenango maps. They're on none of the other map collections. Locks are invariably drawn, whereas the sluice structures depict a high degree of variability in size and design elements. There are actually 14 different types of flumes. 8 of these are unique, and one design was used at 48 different locks. Rather than a random act, the drawings must convey some structural meaning. Unfortunately, the meanings of the draftmen are unclear. The explanatory remarks within the certification pages contain no guide and no legend. The distributions of structure design do not correlate with the contractors that were used for the construction. Hopefully, future archival and archaeological research can link the Hutchison map design patterns with actual structures. The Black River Canal sluice plans dating to 1851 provide some interpretive guidance, but none match Canal Lock Number 3 sluice. Notable features include the timber sills, plank decking, solid wood walls, sheet piling, and a stepped descent and stone-walled gravel-based ditches. The openings to the flumes are shown as solid wood, masonry, or a combination. The only detailed information about original sluice construction is found in an account register for contracts let in the Southern District. Almost always recorded under extra work or work not covered under contract, sluice work was completed by both firms with contracts for the lock and also under separate contracts. The accounts itemized volumes of earth excavated, embankment volume, masonry, and lumber. Notably, all share similar Hutchison designs with minor variations. The information provides a comparative framework for Lock Number 3 sluice and guides interpretation of archaeological findings. The lumber list from the Pratt and Hatch Company account, the only account with this detail, provides clues to the Lock Number 3 flume and the original construction. The hemlock sill timbers noted on the list roughly match those found at Lock Number 3, including the presence of a single long timber. Identified as hemlock by the Cornell Dendrochronology Lab, the sill beams had been adze hewn with the ends either cut or chopped. At Lock Number 3, after excavations into the black marshy soils, a thin layer of clay gravel puddling had been put down, the sill timbers placed, temporarily held by small spanners, and then more puddling was packed between the timbers. The Pratt and Hatch lumber list have posts of 3.5 and 4 3/4 feet lengths. Lock Number 3 excavations revealed mortises in 6 of the 8 sills, with several still bearing scribe marks, which was pretty amazing. I find that sort of detail thrilling, finding it archaeologically, whether it's scribe marks for conducting woodwork or even the pencil marks just to mark out cut lines. To find something dating to 1830 that links directly to a person always gives me a little bit of a thrill, I have to admit. Well-preserved chisel cut chips found adjacent to the timbers suggest the joints were fashioned in place. A single broken tenoned hemlock timber fragment was found matching the listed post dimensions. Several caps are on the Pratt and Hatch list. but given the array of mortises at lock number 3, this flume could accommodate only 6. The post lengths suggest drops along the flume into the foundation deck. Given the extra length, the additional mortises and the sheet piling on the 18-foot long timber, this sill likely supported the gate mechanism. Although the lock number 3 builders used different dimensioned lumber, they matched the finished 3-inch thickness of the Pratt & Hatch contract, but built a narrower 9 by 19 rather than a 12 by 19-foot deck. Despite being smaller in size than the Pratt & Hatch flumes, lock number 3 used almost double the amount of sheet piling. The sills at both ends of the flume were fastened to sheet piling, as was the 18-foot long sill timber. This picture shows some of the sheet piling nailed directly to the sill board. The sheet piling consisted of overlapping beveled planks of 2 and 3-inch thickness and variable widths, some as wide as 19 inches. And nowadays, doing any kind of woodworking, I'd love to get my hands on 19-inch wide boards. They were just pounding them into the ground and using them as piles. The elevation of the top of the canal bank is 4.5 feet above the top of the foundation deck, suggesting the lock number 3 posts were the same length as the Pratt & Hatch posts. Similarly, the maximum height of a stone retaining wall along the south bank of the sluice is 4 3/4 feet above the decking. The top of the wooden flume frame approximated grade level of the canal bank and surrounding land. Dendrochronology indicated the samples of the sill timber, the post, and original peg decking to have been cut just prior to 1833. The sluice ditch was not described in the Pratt & Hatch account sheet, except for the excavated lengths, widths, depths, and volumes. Lock number 3 is estimated to have had a 175-foot long ditch, approximating the shortest ditch of the 4 Pratt & Hatch built. Their ditches were 8 to 14 feet wide and 2 to 7 feet deep. The Black River sluice drawings show a gravel-based ditch with a sidewall lined with stacked rock. This is a composite of photos taken in the same area of our excavations. And after grubbing, the lock number 3 ditch had been dug a little over 2.5 feet down into the organic soil. Then the walls were lined with outward stacked rock conforming to the slope wall of the ditch. This trench was then backfilled with gravel. A series of approximately 6.5 feet long, 1-inch thick planks were placed side by side spanning the stacked rocks, and then dried laid walls were built along both edges. Tree ring analysis indicates the boards were original equipment. Soon after its completion, the Chenango required constant maintenance and repair. Repeated wetting and drying and exposure to upstate New York winters took their toll. Archival records pertaining to repairs are spotty and variable in content and detail. Significant repairs to lock number 3 occurred at least 9 times in the 26 years covered by the records. Sprinkled in between these years were numerous other partial day repair efforts. Like the locks, sluice repairs were typically minor, taking the carpenter or the gravel scow and their crews less than a day to complete. Significant sluice repairs occurred in 1847, 1852, and again in 1871. None of the repair jobs have lumber itemized to judge the scope of the repair work, yet we can look at relative costs. Elsewhere, work at other locks was clearly noted as new sluice. and these ranged between $66 and $113 in the 1870s. The repair to the lock number 3 sluice in 1871 cost around $32, or half as much as the least expensive brand new sluice. Lumber used in the new sluices was greater than that used in the original lock number 3 sluice, number 3 flume, reasserting that this flume was generally smaller than the others. Many of the superintendent's bi-monthly and annual accounts noted the winter season shop construction of lock gates and other portable components. The 1858 Canal Commissioner's Report includes a note about the contracted superintendent having a number of sluices on hand, suggesting flumes were pre-manufactured and interchangeable. Several archaeological features relate to repairs and possibly the later pre-made flumes. A masonry wall spans the flume sills, positioned over the 18-foot long sill and covering several of the mortises along the length. Significantly skewed from the sill timber orientation, this 3-foot wide, 19-foot long wall sits directly on the wood decking and extends beyond the decking to rest on puddled gravels. Paralleling this wall and at the same elevation are a single row of rocks positioned above the deck's western edge. Unlike other locations, sheet pilings extend above the deck surface, reaching near the base of this row of rocks. A single board, 9.5 feet long and 13 inches wide, was exposed along the deck's south side. The board was shaped to fit into the masonry wall and extended easterly to the edge of the solid decking. Nail patterns suggest the board was fastened to the 3rd and 4th posts. The board was milled sometime after 1857. A 3rd stone wall spanned the southern end of the ditch and was built on top of and beyond the low walls paralleling the ditch. This row of stacked rocks rested on gravelly fills above the ditch decking. It was not interlocking and had minimal structural strength. The wall is perpendicular to the first, better built stone wall and at a slightly lower elevation. The corner section beyond the intact deck was a jumble of rock, fills, and short lengths of lumber. Remnants suggest the corner was once decked, with planks oriented in a radial pattern, turning the curve, and also by planks extending straight from the intact flume foundation and pegged to the eastern sill. The pegged planks date to the original construction. The use of wooden pegs suggests the location was expected to remain wet. It seems the energy of water rushing off the flume and turning the corner were particularly erosive and caused problems. Notably, reported sluice repairs shift through time to a complete focus on upper flumes with no mention of outfalls suggesting greater erosion in this location. It seems plausible that sometime after 1857, the largest wall was built and the wall, posts, and sideboard were used to support a replacement gate and flume frame. The northern wall may have acted as a dam, slowing the water before it reached the plank-decked ditch. Sediments would have accumulated, covering the eroded corner decking and creating an earthen step before the plank-decked ditch. These and other modifications and repairs reflect constant decay coupled with diminished state support and funding. The stonework illustrates an adaptive make-do attitude, as well as suggesting the use of a more mobile interchangeable unit. The archaeological documentation of this subset of canal structures contributes to the broader understanding of the range of structural design and construction methods brought to bear on this 19th century transportation project. Further, archaeological remains of these canal structures may contribute the only historic record of anonymous junior field engineers, craftsmen, builders, and laborers who built the Chenango Canal. Now, a little of this is going to be some refresher. I've said it already, but like I said, these were two different presentations, some of overlapping, but perhaps it might be good to refresh the location of some of the features found in our excavations. So to review briefly, in 2013 and 14, the museum conducted excavations at 1026, 1028 Lincoln Avenue. There's nothing there now except the grocery store and parking lots. But that stretch of Lincoln Avenue was basically edge to edge with households and businesses at one time. And our excavations there were also part of the same New York State DOT's North-South Arterial project. Now, you've seen this photo before, but archaeologists revealed portions of the canal prism, lock number 3, and that lock's bypass sluice flume and ditch, 3 backyard privies, and several domestic drain pipes buried beneath the 3 meters of 19th century corporate fills and primary deposits. Our excavations uncovered more than 75,000 artifacts that were cataloged. Since then, I've presented several papers at professional conferences and to the public, one of which you just heard. This is another one. That's what you just heard. And this one might be one of my favorites, not covered today, about a particular character who was several times mayor of Utica. His name was Thomas Wheeler. Anyway, you'll hear some reference to Thomas Wheeler in this, in that he and a partner were contractors in the city. This paper I find is pretty interesting, and I think I presented it, and it might be available on the YouTube channel for the History Center to get the Thomas Wheeler story as reflected by archaeology in Utica. Now, large data recovery projects are complex logistical beasts, and the analyses that follow are interdependent and cumulative. My focus in this part of the presentation is on the analysis and interpretation of 3 backyard privies. Given restrictions of time, I'm unable to explicitly provide theoretical background or the rationale for each line of investigation, method, or logical sequence leading to all of the interpretations. Listed here are the many methods and approaches used to parse each archaeological level, segregate and aggregate depositional units and contexts, and assign dates. Each one of these would be a lecture in probably a college classroom, so nothing I can present to you today. But I'd be happy to answer any questions about them if you have particular ones. Oh, I don't want to keep going backwards. Aggressive lobbying shifted the terminus of the Chenango Canal eastward into Utica from Whitesboro, even after construction had started in 1833. This brought the canal down the Nail Creek drainage, diverging from that waterway a short distance from the Erie Canal. This particular neighborhood had seen some subdivision, but was not extensively developed while the canal was in operation between 1835 and 1878. Canal conditions had deteriorated significantly, and the last year cargo passed through the canal was 1876. The house at 1026 Lincoln, this is a back alley view from a photo held here at the History Center, showing you the locations approximately of 1026, 1028 Lincoln, and then a restaurant that was next door. This alleyway is, this is taken from about where the arterial is now. So the house at 1026 Lincoln was then called, the street location was then called 24 Chenango. Of course, this is before Lincoln's name started popping up on things, so the street name changed. So the house at 1026 Lincoln was constructed in 1876 and occupied by a series of tenants. The house at 1028 Lincoln, then 26 Chenango, was built in 1879. I'm going to stop at this photo, again, derived from here. And if you do a close-up, there's to the right, behind the beat-up car, is a sign on that door that says ladies entrance. So men and women entered that restaurant from different, and also if you zoom in, there's a man in the window kind of looking out at the photographer, probably wondering what is going on out there, and why is he taking a picture of my beat-up old Fender. So the house at 1028 Lincoln was built in 1879 by Timothy Sweeney and occupied by his family and tenants. Sweeney, a printer and foreman for several local newspapers and later an excise commissioner, purchased the neighboring rental house in 1882. Meanwhile, the abandoned canal continued to carry a restricted flow of water and had become an open sewer and a public health concern. Despite the development of public sewerage through the neighborhood by 1883, numerous ordinances prohibiting canal dumping and requiring linkage to existing sewers, many Lincoln Ave residents, and the city for that matter, continued to dump their liquid and solid wastes into the canal bed. Both residences had constructed privies behind the dwellings. Our excavations revealed one behind 1026 Lincoln, that would be feature number 4 in the lower right, and two behind 1028 Lincoln, features 5 and 7. We cannot be certain these are the only facilities built and used by these residences. The construction of 2 privies behind an owner-built and occupied duplex residence may be a conscious decision to maintain a level of family privacy and a demonstration of economic stature. The single privy shared by 2 families at 1026 may be a marker of a residence constructed for tenant occupancy only. It appears 2 or maybe 3 privies trespassed on state land. The blue line in this picture represents what was owned by the state. The registration of various historic maps gives variable results. The state property is highlighted in blue on this series of maps and indicates features 5 and 7 are definitely over the line, and feature 4 is over or on the boundary in half of the maps. The multiple lot lines on the most recent property maps illustrates the difficulties modern cartographers had in rectifying the historic maps and meets and bounds descriptions. Certainly, these landowners mirrored the general pattern observed in other 19th century cities by positioning their privies and their associated odors and miasmas far from the house and in a private location. Around 1880, only 5% of Utica's homes were outfitted with indoor plumbing linked to municipal sewers. Like city ordinances elsewhere, Utica long guided privy locations relative to water sources and prohibited the gradual filling and capping of backyard privies. Ordinances required that privy vaults and night soils be removed at least annually and during seasonally adjusted hours. The contents were not to be dumped in the canal. All three privies were positioned to take advantage of the hydrologic conditions created by the Chenango Canal prism and the sluice around lock number 3. Even at a reduced flow after abandonment, the constructed topography likely created a draw away from the vaults. All vaults were constructed in the same manner and roughly the same size. Each was built with horizontally stacked, variable width eastern hemlock and eastern white pine boards with larger dimensioned lumber reinforcing the corners. All cut nails were driven inward, suggesting the vaults were assembled on the surface and then lowered into tightly excavated shafts, and then propped with scrap lumber or flat rocks, bringing them to plumb and level. Tim Sweeney sold the 7-year-old 1028 property to his tenant, Thomas Cavanaugh, in 1886, and continued to rent the 1026 property to several families. Sweeney sold that 12-year-old house to the Gordon family in 1888. They'd been renting from Sweeney for 4 years. Finally, after years of lobbying efforts, a state law was proposed to fill this section of the abandoned canal in January of 1887. And that became law later in June. The law provided the city the lands for subdivision and sale as a means to finance the filling and grading project. By August 23rd, the local canal commission had selected the Dwyer and Wheeler Company to fill the canal, and the attentive populace knew things were going to change. These newspaper reports mentioned that several coal sheds, barns, and outbuildings in the neighborhood were to be removed or demolished as they were encroaching on canal lands. Privies were not specifically noted, yet likely met the same demise. The press reported work was well underway by October's end. Given all water near lock number 5 needed to be diverted to Nail Creek, work likely began there and progressed north. News articles stated work crews were pushing towards the December 1st completion date. Contract payment was approved on December 6th, suggesting the job was finished. The upper portions of 3 privies were filled with levels of ash and refuse, capping layers of demolition lumber. The fill levels for the side-by-side features 5 and 7 were stratigraphically linked and showed the directional flow and force of the fill operations. These levels were directly linked to strata capping other canal-related features elsewhere on the site and firmly established the abandonment date to the end of November in 1887. These photos show the demolition level in each of the 3 privies. Lee Decker and others have described the depositional processes associated with Privy filling and identify the types and character of artifacts that are markers of those processes. The processes include deposition of human wastes, accidental loss, gradual long-term filling, also rapid deposition, household cleanout, redeposition from yard deposits, with its depositional siblings stockpiled deposits, intentional placement for drainage, and lastly, I would add rapid large-scale corporate fills, such as what happened when the canal was abandoned and they filled the whole thing. Based on artifact pattern analyses, ceramic variability and uniqueness, and the result of fragmentation and completeness analyses on ceramic, bottle glass, and table glass in the Privies, the pre-abandonment content were the result of the accumulation of human waste, accidental deposits, and the rapid deposition of stockpiled human refuse, household refuse. The capping deposits were large, rapid corporate fills. So who occupied these residences in November 1887? Two families lived at 1026. Both families were tenants, and in the parlance of those who study family stages or household cycles, these were both mature or fission state families. Both family units had multiple earners and would be considered lower middle to middle class, even though laborers did not receive high wages. Having two or more wage earners improved the family situation. In the Ricewick family, the wage earning profile is misleading, as the patriarch, Ernst William Sr., was ill and in fact died on November 28th. Note that he, his son, and at least one of his sons-in-law were butchers. His wife and daughters likely brought income to the family as they had worked previously in the cotton and wool mills, and later were identified as seamstresses. In contrast, the residence at 1028, with its side-by-side privies, was owned and occupied by a very young or expanding family, the Kavanaughs. Thomas was a coachman, a relatively unskilled occupation. We may assume they earned more than teamsters. Regardless of the low wage, he was able to purchase a relatively new house. Given the dwelling had held multiple families under previous and subsequent owners, we might assume the Kavanaughs supplemented their income by taking in boarders or short-term renters. By 1887, ashes and rubbish were being collected every Friday in Utica, and garbage was also collected weekly for a rate of 10 cents a week. The accumulation of garbage, considered a nuisance, was prohibited, but it was well known that residents skipped collections, risking fines yet saving collection fees. Cold fall and winter temperatures might afford an opportunity to stockpile garbage without it putrefying, getting smelly, and alerting neighbors and the authorities. Although the specific rates for night soil collection are unknown, one would assume that it was more expensive per volume. Therefore, the intentional disposal of ashes, rubbish, or garbage in an active privy would not be economically logical. Besides the ash and rubbish artifacts, the privy refuse included bone, fruit pits, and eggshell that would be considered garbage. It seems plausible that residents stockpiled several weeks of refuse immediately prior to privy closure and used the opportunity to dispose the accumulated waste. By August, newspapers warned of the pending project, but by October, residents adjacent to the canal knew their privy's end was at hand. Late 19th and early 20th century sanitary engineers published statistics in cities around the country regarding rates of ash, rubbish, and garbage production. Looking at the weight of rubbish materials, Feature 4 shows the greatest amount in the smallest post-demolition volume, nearly 50% more than both of the other features combined, in a third to a quarter of their summed volumes. Given the number of residents associated with 1026, the difference seems understandable. I averaged the published low, mean, and high pounds per capita rates of weekly rubbish production and used the measured weights from the Privies to get an idea of what the deposits represent in terms of time. At high production, the deposits represent a week or a little more. At average production, it seems the deposit represents roughly 2 weeks. At low production, about 5 to 7 weeks worth of garbage and rubbish production. Let's quickly look at some of the details of some of the assemblages. In terms of ceramics, feature number 4 had greater variety in numbers of vessels, yet no sets of wares, nothing matched. It seems rather unusual to break 29 vessels, including 9 plates in a week, or 2 even with 12 folks in the house. This would be breaking 1 item per week per person for 2 weeks. These slides show most of the ceramics as highly fragmented, with only a few that can be reconstructed. The collection is certainly not the archaeological eye candy typically illustrated for clean-out deposits in Privy contexts. A similar pattern extends to glass tableware, with the greater numbers in feature 4. An orientation towards serving dishes and possibly alcohol consumption. Several of these pieces share the same patterns and may be part of a set. Still, it seems as though folks in 1026 are a bit klutzy. Bottle glass does not seem particularly out of balance relative to the household populations. Notably, all 3 privies have a small, sample-sized cologne or perfume bottle. An 1887 air freshener, perhaps. There are slightly more patent medicine bottles, including a Dr. Radway's sarsaparilian resolvement, and more alcohol bottles in feature 4. Feature 4 contained more eggs, more shellfish, greater numbers of meat units, and greater amounts of pork. Chicken is more common in feature 5. The variety and quantity of meat in feature 4 may be related to the household population, or that several household members and non-resident relatives were butchers. The presence of suckling pig, trotters, and pig head may also point toward a butcher's home. I would say an amazing variety of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and spices are present in the privies, with subtle differences. I often think somehow probably because of the images that were shown from the 19th century in black and white, I always have this idea of 19th century life being very simple and maybe very sort of poor compared to the rich assortment of things available to us now. So this list of the types of plants and herbs and spices available to folks in Utica in 1887 is just kind of breaks that gray tone idea of the 19th century. I want to point out some things: caraway, cumin, fennel, cloves, Brazil nuts, an incredible variety of berries. Yeah, there was a cannabis seed. I imagine that has something to do with the hemp. Not sure. Every privy contained evidence for at least one resident having roundworms, and an individual or individuals in the 1026 Lincoln house also carrying whipworms. The evidence suggests the infections were neither severe nor characteristic of multiple carriers within the household. Given the privy's location next to an open sewer, the presence of worms is not really that surprising. This table illustrates the variety of other items found in the privy vaults. Lamp glass and lighter shoes and shoe fragments. From the display, you can see that Utica was a shoe manufacturing center at one time. Our excavations, even in the fill of the canal, had one layer that was very rich in shoe fragments. Perhaps it was a dump from some of the factory scraps or whatever. Also note in this slide the number of buttons in feature 4. Remember that I said that the women of the household were seamstresses. That's a possible link. Children's toys and dolls were also very prevalent. Other small finds include a jackknife, a harness bell, and buttons. Jackknife, a harness bell, buttons, a slate pencil, spoon, a brush, a doll. Ernst William Ruswig died on November 28th, and his home funeral held on the 30th. It'd be tempting to associate some of the feature 4 deposits with that event, although the timeline is cutting it very, very close. The contract date was December 1st, and we know that payment was approved on the 6th. Greater amounts of broken ceramic, service and beverage glass, alcohol bottles, and patent medicine bottles. Greater amounts of meat might be associated with feeding and entertaining large numbers of people during the illness or at the funeral. The remainder of the assemblage and its character lacked the signature of a classic post-illness or death household clean-out, which would have included the patient or deceased's clothing, bedding, medical supplies, and a large number of reconstructible ceramics and glassware. In conclusion, an owner-built and occupied duplex residence may have included the construction of privies for each domicile, whereas the duplex residence, constructed and used exclusively as a rental property, featured a single privy shared by 2 families. The weight of the privy fills fall within the expected range of household refuse production. However, the assemblage character best matches stockpiled refuse, opportunistically discarded prior to demolition. We have the fortune of fairly precise dated deposits associated with specific households and can observe general patterns from the assemblages, yet there remain many unanswered questions. The project as a whole is an illustration of what can be teased from a massive deposit of the oft-maligned urban fills. This pipe was from the feature 5, and it happens to correspond roughly with this event in Ireland, which many people in the States supported by the purchase and the smoking of these home rolled pipes. So, thank you.
Let's give David a hand.